got a story for you today that will entertain you, so relax and enjoy. And remember, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. So let's go. On September 2nd, 1999, in the suburban town of Jericho, New York, which was just 30 miles from downtown Manhattan, Ronald Cohen was preparing to sell his house, and he just found a buyer for the property for $455,000. And the new owner wanted to take a final walkthrough before taking ownership. This buyer was particularly very thorough, and during the walkthrough, he wanted to see the crawl space beneath, which was an addition that was built onto the back of the house about 30 years ago. The crawl space was only 36 inches high, so the two men had to hunch down to get through the larger space. And at the very back of the crawl space, they noticed a 55-gallon barrel on its side wedged beneath the stairs. And this is when the buyer asked Mr. Cohen about the barrel, and Mr. Cohen said it's been there since he bought the property over 10 years ago. Mr. Cohen said he had absolutely no idea what was in there, and it was far too heavy to move by himself, so he ended up, just leaving it there. And after that, it just slipped out of his mind, and he ended up totally forgetting about it. This is when the buyer said he wanted it removed before he would purchase the property. So Mr. Cohen and his real estate agent got some help and rolled out the barrel from underneath the home and then took it to the curb so the trash workers could haul it away. But when the sanitation workers showed up the next day, they informed Mr. Cohen that the barrel weighed over 355 pounds. And was way too heavy for them to take away, especially since they had no idea what was in it. And it needed to be emptied to make sure that there was no hazardous material or toxic materials inside. So Mr. Cohen and his real estate agent decided, okay, fair enough. And they opened up the barrel. Well, at least they tried to open it up. There was a metal seal around the top of the barrel, so they had to get some tools, and they ended up prying it open. And after that, the two men immediately were hit with this overwhelmingly horrible smell, and it was the unmistakable smell of death. Once the lid was removed, they could see a curled human hand and a woman's shoe, plus the barrel was filled with a green fluid surrounded by these tiny plastic pellets. And at this point, Mr. Cohen immediately called the police. So the police, they rushed to the scene and immediately took the barrel to the forensics lab, where they emptied it onto a large white tarp so they could collect any evidence. And inside the barrel, they found a small mummified female body. Now, the body had been crumpled over and bent in half so it could fit into the barrel. And because the barrel was sealed so tightly, her body had been fairly well preserved, with the skin the same as the consistency as rubber at that point. But when it hit the air, it began decaying quickly, and it was immediately taken away for an autopsy. During the autopsy, it was determined that the body was a female of Hispanic descent, and that she was very small, only about 4'9", and she had long black hair along with some unusual gold bridge work on her teeth. And the bridge work was not something commonly done in the United States at that time, and had most likely been done in South America somewhere. The cause of death was determined to be from blunt force trauma to the head. Someone literally used a hammer to smash her head 7 to 10 times, crushing her skull until she died. And to make things worse, it was also found that she was either 8 or 9 months pregnant when she died. So police collected DNA from the fetus to see if they could find a match to the father. And when the police emptied out the rest of the barrel, they found this strange green gooey liquid that they thought was possibly a chemical dye of some sort. And they also noticed a tiny black and white plastic bunch of pellets mixed with this goo, and the woman's clothes were still intact as well, and it seemed to be from a style from the 60s. Then, at the bottom of the barrel, they found the woman's purse, along with some cosmetic items, along with a badly damaged address book, and there was also a green stem from a plastic flower arrangement that was very strange. So, upon looking at the address book, it was badly damaged and most of it stuck together with the green goo, and the detectives at first weren't hopeful of getting any clues from it, but just in case, it was put inside a forensic dyeing cabinet for a few days to dry out. So after that following day, detectives began researching to find out where the barrel may have came from. And then the homeowner, Mr. Cohen, explained that it was already there when he bought the house several years ago, and detectives began going back through the prior owners to find out who built that extension on the house. And after they researched 4 prior owners, they eventually found the one homeowner who built the extension to the home, and he was now 71 years old and lived in Boca Raton, Florida. His name was Howard Elkins, and he sold the house back in 1972 and retired when he closed his plastics business that he owned in Manhattan. Police, at this point, they definitely think they got a suspect and immediately wanted to question him. But before they did, they wanted to collect a little bit more information before making the trip south. And as the days went on, the clues started to pour in. On the side of the barrel, there were letters that printed GAF, which turned out to be a chemical company based in New Jersey. Police then took photos of the barrel and brought some of the pellets and a sample of the green dye for them to analyze at GAF, and they confirmed that the pellets were polyethylene pellets, and they were used to make many plastic products. One of these products was plastic flowers. And when it came to the green dye, it was a unique product called halogen green, which was a dye specifically used to make plastic flower bases in the 1960s. And the only customer they had for that product was a company called Melrose Plastics. And it was the same company that Howard Elkins had closed in 1972. Meanwhile, the forensics document lab made some progress on the damaged address book. They dried it out enough to at least a point where they could get, the pages separated. But the ink at this point completely disintegrated from the pages. But using a device called a video spectral comparator, they were able to read some of the information on the documents by using alternative light sources. The first portion that they were able to read in the book was a number that started with the letter A, and it was a resident alien number. So detectives spoke with immigration officers, but the number was from over 30 years ago, and their systems had changed at this point. So they let them know that it's going to take some time if they come back with any result at all. So now knowing that the barrel, the plastics, and the dye all came from Howard Elkins' business, and that they found the barrel beneath Elkins' former home, detectives now believe they had enough information to take a trip to Florida and question him. But before questioning him, they wanted to visit his former business partner in the plastic flower business, whose name was Melvin Gantman, and he also retired to Boca Raton, Florida. Mr. Gantman confirmed that he and Mr. Elkins were business partners, but that he had not spoken to him in years. And when they showed him a photo of this barrel, Gantman quickly did confirm that the barrel was one that they often used for their company. Plus, he also verified the dye color and plastic pellets were what they used in making their plastic flowers. And then, when shown the photo of the plastic stem found in the barrel, he knew it was from their company as well. Now, the most useful information Gantman had was something he recalled from back in the late 60s when he knew that Elkins was having an affair with a Hispanic employee at the company and that he rented an apartment for her. Now, he didn't know her name, but he remembered that she had strange gold teeth in the front and long black hair. Gantman also recalled getting a phone call from the landlord of the apartment that Elkins was renting for her. And the landlord was looking for Elkins so he could empty out the apartment and all the belongings because they were still in the apartment. And the landlord did this because he wanted to get things moving so he could rent it out again. And as of now, the detectives were more than ever convinced that 71-year-old Elkins was indeed the killer. And they went to his home, and Elkins answered the door, invited them in, and all the things that Gantman easily remembered from the business, Elkins didn't seem to remember at all. He had no recollection of the barrel, the dye, the plastic pellets, nothing. Surprisingly, when he was asked if he had an affair during that time, he freely admitted that he did. And all he could say was that it was a very short affair, and then she left, and when asked if he knew if she was pregnant or if he even knew her name, he seemed to not remember anything about her at all. Now, obviously to the detectives, this seemed very convenient for him to have such a lapse in memory. But this is when detectives informed him that the girl was found pregnant and deceased in a barrel beneath his former house, and Elkins at this point seemed completely unfazed. And when they asked for a sample of his DNA, he looked at them, shook his head, and just said no. And just as he said no, his phone rang, and it was his wife. And after speaking briefly to his wife, Elkins told the detectives that they needed to leave immediately. He said his wife was coming home and that they needed to talk about a lot of things. And the New York detectives technically had no jurisdiction in Florida to get a warrant or to make an arrest, but before they left, they did inform Elkins that they would be back with a warrant and put him in jail for the rest of his life. Then, the following morning, the two detectives received a call from the local Palm Beach Police Department, and Elkins was nowhere to be found because his wife had put out a missing persons report. So friends, family, and the police were all out searching for Howard Elkins, and he was later found that evening in his neighbor's garage in the back seat of their Ford Explorer. That morning, he had gone to Walmart and purchased a 12-gauge Mossberg shotgun, and Elkins sat in the back seat of that SUV, and he put the shotgun right between his legs and put the barrel of the shotgun in his mouth and found whatever courage he had left in him to pull the trigger, and he shot himself in the head. Now, at this point, there wasn't any question of his guilt, but detectives collected his DNA from the scene and took it back to New York, where it was confirmed that he was the father of the fetus, which, no pun intended, was the nail in his coffin. And as soon as they returned to New York, 8 days after the barrel was found, they got word back from immigration with the identity of the victim. And her name was Reina Angelica Marroquin. And she had immigrated to the United States in 1966 from El Salvador. The forensic document team was also able to get more information from that address book that they recovered. And they recovered several names, addresses, and phone numbers. And the phone numbers were over 30 years old. So detectives, they didn't have much hope for them, but they tried calling anyway. And amazingly, one number still worked. And the woman that answered was named Kathy Andrade. She was actually a really close friend of Reina and was still living at the exact same location 3 decades later. Kathy identified Reina from a 30-year-old immigration photo and said that Reina immigrated from El Salvador and worked making plastic flowers at Melrose Plastics in the 60s. If this crime was a puzzle, it seems like every piece was beginning to fit, from who the victim was to who the killer was, along with the circumstances that allowed all this to happen. And then in November 1968, Reina had told Kathy that she had been dating her boss at the flower factory and that she was indeed pregnant with his child. Kathy didn't know his name, only that it was Reina's boss at the flower factory. And one day, Reina told Kathy that she made a terrible mistake and said that she had gotten really mad at him and called Elkin's wife. And Reina told his wife that her husband was having an affair with her and had promised to marry her instead, and that she was pregnant with his baby. And at this point, Reina told Kathy that she was absolutely terrified that he would kill her. And it turns out that her assumption was absolutely correct. And that was the last time Kathy ever heard from Reina. Kathy did going to Reina's apartment one afternoon where there were plates set out for dinner. And the dinner was still warm on the stove, but there was no sign of Reina. So she called the police at that time to report her as missing, but was told that she wasn't a family member, so she couldn't file a missing persons report. So she tried to call Reina every day for weeks after that, but never heard from her and eventually just gave up. Now, Oscar Coral, who was a journalist covering this story for Newsday, a daily newspaper in New York City, tracked down Reina's 95-year-old mother in San Salvador, El Salvador, and flew down to visit her. Her mother said she would speak and write on a regular basis and talk on the phone with Reina when suddenly, out of nowhere, all the contacts stopped and she had absolutely no idea why. Now, this is a really crazy part. She said she would often dream of Reina trapped inside a barrel. And at this point, when I read this story, my whole body literally got chills, as I'm sure yours is probably doing the same right now. I mean, there really is something about a mother's intuition that is otherworldly. So, to sum things up, Reina's body was transported back to El Salvador to be buried, and her mother ended up dying 1 month later and was able to be buried right next to her beloved daughter, Reina. Please, if you enjoyed this, take a moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. And share this video with everybody that you know. That's the most important part. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.